To weigh in, let's ask our A-plus panel for the day. Watchdog on Wall Street host Chris Markowski, former advisor to Margaret Thatcher and President Trump, John Brown, and PwC partner Mitch Rochelle. Mitch, let me start with you. What do we need to see in an advisory group, and how should they proceed as far as working with states?
I think it's working with states, and it's also working with business, right? Because obviously the states are the ones, it appears to be, who have the right to close the local economy, so they have the right to reopen it. But I think what's going to be interesting is how those folks on that advisory committee engage with the private sector, because it's really about the private sector getting people back to work and figuring out what the rules are to get people back to work so we can get the economy started again.
That is the big question. How soon? And we want to make sure that we do it right. Let's go ahead and bring in Chris Markowski. Chris, what do you think?
The sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned. I think it's a necessity we get this thing open ASAP. And I think the governors are also starting to recognize as well, try to read in between the numbers, in between the lines to some degree, where we take a look every day at the amount of cases. They may be increasing, but again, it doesn't show all the people that have not been tested that may have got it to get to that herd immunity point of view. I think the governors as well, I think they're coming to the understanding that they have no revenue coming in, and they're going to have to deal with the fact that without any revenue coming in, all the things that they'd like to do, well, they're going to get thrown out the window. So they're going to be anxious to get open as well.
John, you know, the president had something today about yesterday about the authority of the president and all. And then Cuomo was talking today. He has his hand out. He wants to get along with the president. Are they going to be able to put this whole thing aside and move forward? What's this going to look like for them to actually accomplish something together?
Well, I think it's going to be a balance between persuasion by the president and those that don't comply with the national interest as opposed to the state interest will be in contention with the president.
Yeah, what do you think the governors need from the president? Because the president obviously looks at himself as having a great deal of leverage. What do you think he offers the governors?
Well, I think the point of leverage he has is that a lot of these acts that have been done to freeze this and shut down that are actually unconstitutional infringements on individual rights laid down in the Constitution. And I think that will work well for the president and be ammunition for the president to get the economy restarted, as the former two speakers have just said, which is quite right.
Mitchell, do you agree?
I think that it's really about balance. I think that all along, that's how the economy gets started or gets shut down is about striking the right balance between a public health crisis and potentially an economic one. So as we reopen, I think it's going to be about balance. And I think testing is going to be very important. As I speak to CEOs, CFOs, business owners about their individual decisions about getting people back to their workplace, what they're unclear about is what the rules are going to be in terms of testing employees to get them back.
Yeah, you know, Chris.
I think testing is very important. Also, following up. What the Koreans have done so well in South Korea is following up. And I imagine that companies like Apple and other great high-tech companies are working now on trying to get a very smooth and fast follow-up for finding out through tracking of GPS on their cell phones who people have been in contact with.
Well, you don't want people followed on their cell phones here, right?
Yes, and I think
you do.
I think they're working now. I hope they are on tracking people of whom they've been in contact with to make sure it's not. As I totally agree that testing is vitally important, but also the tracking of people and quarantining the ones that have been in contact with infectious people.
Okay, Chris, let's also talk about some other elements such as shift work, tax incentives. I think the president would like to see you be able to write off those business lunches again. So how do you think that may play into this?
Yeah, going out to dinner for restaurants. Also, they took away some of the entertainment write-offs in the last tax bill, Trump's last tax bill, for tickets like Giants games or Yankee games or whatever it may be, wanting to put those in to give people an incentive. I do think we're starting to see right now the overall populace say, okay, enough is enough. You're starting to see protests around the country. I think people are kind of antsy to get out of the house and start doing things. So I think there's going to be a point in time people are going to look within the numbers. They're going to evaluate their own risk. I think it's great. Like you pointed out that tweet, if you're at risk, you should be staying home. But if you're young and healthy, you need to be out and about and helping to push that herd immunity.
And Chris, when you get those Yankee tickets in there, you can write them off. Would you remind me?
You got it.
Keep me in mind. We'll talk again next hour because this is going to be one of the most important things, as he said, an important decision for the president. But I think everybody in the country is going to be affected by what happens here and how we do it. We got to do this right the first time.
Chris Markowski, John Brown, and Mitch Rochelle, thank you so much for your time today. Here to break down if this economic comeback team can get the job done is our A-plus panel of the day, watchdog on Wall Street host Chris
That would be a
Markowski.
team right there.
Look at that stellar team.
They could do it themselves.
Former advisor to Margaret Thatcher and President Trump, John Brown, and PwC partner Mitchell Rochelle. Mitchell, let's begin with you. What, in your opinion, is the best way to go about getting America working again?
Well, you'd mentioned opening it all up at once, and I would say if it didn't close that way, it shouldn't reopen that way. So obviously some sort of a phasing. We talked in the previous hour about how testing is going to be the public sector, private sector, and how they coordinate those two elements is going to be really, really key. I think there's some great stories about public-private partnerships in terms of getting much-needed supplies to Americans, to our healthcare system. I think we're going to need that level of cooperation and coordination, even on steroids, to get the economy.
I agree with us. I think rolling or phasing, whatever you call it, I think the president is an extremely astute businessman. He'll pick an extremely effective team, which and we should all work together. Governors have got to start working for the national interest, not just for a sectional state interest. And I hope the Democrat Party will start working.
But every state has their own interests, though, and their own peculiarities they have to deal with, though. You'd agree with that, right?
Of course. And of course, every single member of a soccer team or a rugby team or an American football team has their own interests, but we work for the team. And the team is the United States of America, not an individual state.
I'm ready to go. Put me in, Coach.
Well, Chris, I'm interested in hearing from you. What are your listeners saying, and what is your take on this?
Well, first and foremost, I think that we're going to have to obviously change the whole idea of, well, they changed the word quarantine to shelter in place. And we're going to have to start talking about people that are at risk that are going to have to continue to shelter in place. And we're going to have to start saying, okay, we have certain people out there that are going to be at less risk than others, some of the healthy people, no pre-existing conditions, and let them get out. I know that I'm going to be able next week to be able to take a plasma test, like a pinprick on my finger, to make sure maybe I had the disease in the past, and maybe carrying some of the antibodies are going to be rolled out. Now I'm in a bit of a hot spot here on Long Island in New York. But again, you're going to have to start letting people get back to work. There's going to be a second wave of layoffs are about ready to happen. Many businesses that allowed their workers to work from home can't afford to pay them that much longer. Governments are no longer going to be able to pay government workers that have been at home, and they're going to start being furloughed. And that's where a lot of governors are going to start feeling the heat and feeling the pressure. Andrew Cuomo's already pressured here in New York because he declined raises that were already programmed into government workers here. When layoffs start coming, then people are going to start getting a little bit antsy.
Yeah, and John, you've talked about this. The government, what responsibility does it have, since it shut things down, to then flood money to those people to try to keep things going? Is there another wave coming?
Well, the government didn't shut all down. It was the governors that shut most things down. Of course, the government has a responsibility for the nation. And that is why they've introduced these enormous, gigantic rescue packages approaching $6.6 trillion. And even now, the Democrats are playing up on the small business loans and allowing that to run out of money. So these things have got to be done. And I think the president will have the Constitution on his side as he's acting in the national interest. And a lot of what has been taking place in the shutdowns has actually been counter to individual rights enshrined in the Constitution.
So then what are you suggesting the president would do?
Well, I think, as I've said many times, a rolling phase start, and a lot of other contributors have said the same. I think testing people is going to be very important, as I said before in a previous section. I think the following up of people is going to be very important, who they've been in contact with. And I wouldn't be surprised to hear that Apple and other high-tech companies are already working feverishly on developing a system for the government to do this, because this proved to be very important in South Korea and in Germany.
Mitch, I want to bring you in now. We are talking a lot about the economic recovery team. The president expected to announce that team later today. Who are you hoping will be on that team? What do you think the nation needs?
It's sort of less about who and more about their experience. I think, as I've said before, I think engaging the private sector and supporting cooperation between the private sector and the public sector is important. Ultimately, whatever the rules are, they're going to have to be commercial in terms of the private sector being able to abide by them. They could impose stiff regulations that make it very difficult for people to get back to work. That's not going to help people get back to work. So I think it's going to be really having the right voice of the private sector in that.
What is that voice, though, Mitch? I mean, you're a financial guy. Does this have to have some financial experts on it? Somebody from big banks, somebody from small business, somebody from the hospitality industry? Who do you envision on there?
I think the answer is yes, Bob. I think it's CEOs of actual businesses that are impacted. And I think it's sort of people who have practical experience in what it would be involved. What does it take to, you have a lodging industry that was running an occupancy level around 70%, and now it's running a single digit occupancy level. How do you get the lodging industry back? Yeah. And how do we begin to create, the problem is we have a revenue shortage, we have a cash flow shortage in our economy. And right now the government is trying to print money to fill that up. But how do we begin to get companies earning again so that they can continue to support the other aspects of the economy? I think you need people who work in companies and create value to be a part of that conversation.
Chris, anyone that you'd like to see on the team?
Nobody in particular. It's going to be more of a sales job to the American people saying, listen, this is not as deadly as they're making it out to be. Every bloody projection that they gave us so far has been so far off, it's ridiculous. You can dig into the numbers, and you've got to make people, feel safe that they can go back out and dip their toe in the water and get back out and about again. All of the stimulus in the entire world is not going to save if people are not going back out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much of this is left to people. Do you go to the restaurant? Do you still socially distance even at work? I mean, all those things. Gentlemen, thank you. Chris Markowski, John Brown, Mitch Rochelle, thank you so much.